Hang on a second. Hang on just a second.
Okay.
I can hear you better now doing it this way. Hang on a minute. Let's see if I can let you see me on the screen by the other bit. So then we might have a three-way version of it there. So, can you see me? It all happened to you. You missed the fire alarm. I went up and down. I had to go up and down 12 flights of stairs. Not a good thing for me. So if I look a bit bright red, it's because of that. I'm trying to call on the other bit. I'm trying to call on the Skype web, and it's just you're not answering it on that. If you answer it on that, you should see me on the cam. But it's not on my phone. I don't know.
Hang on. Are you on the web? Are you
I'm on the phone, and I'm also trying to do it off my computer because you can see me on the computer, and I thought you could hear me on my phone.
Right, are you using Skype on your phone?
Yes.
Right, you should be able to, if you tap it, you should have like a webcam button.
I don't know. Right, hang on a second. That's it. Can you see me now? Have I got to hold my phone like this the whole time? Okay, all right. I might have our make halfway through this. I'll see if I can balance it somewhere. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Pronounced Yuff. Y-U-F-F. Yuff. Yeah. That's all right. I'd have let you call me whatever, as long as you weren't swearing at me, it would have been all right. Right, I'm going to shut my office door now and then prop the phone up. Right, oh. Well, that's it. Well, my poor PhD student, she's doing her Viva now. She had to break off in the middle of it due to the fire alarm, and so after I finished, I've got to give her some fizz to drink, whether she's passed or failed.
Yes. It would help if I had the microphone on. Yeah, she should be in shortly. You guys have her. I think you added her, you said? Perfect.
Here and
Well done,
it's all going to be all right.
All right, so just to, oh, I can hear myself now. That's good. Okay, just to run through, what we'll do is I'm going to introduce the whole event very briefly. I'm going to introduce each of you very briefly, and then I'm going to hand over to Claire. Claire's very excited about Tim. Important coffee. Lovely. Yeah, so you're going to start, I think? Yeah. So Claire Saunders is going to start, and then we'll move on to Claire Hughes. And then Sheila, would you be all right going third?
Yes.
Is that okay? And
Yeah,
Christina
that's
fourth,
fine.
is that all right? Are you happy with that? Do you want to fight about it? Is you all right? Okay.
I'll run the microphone.
All right, so we've got...
Hello? Hello?
Oh, I've got...
I wasn't aware, and I'm actually doing a live online meeting.
Brilliant.
So, okay.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Well, who have you got your meeting with? I haven't got you in at 1 o'clock.
Are you all right if I just, for a second, I want to go
sure.
and see if
Right,
Juan's here.
Please do, yeah, no worries.
I can't do it now because, like I said, I'm doing this thing online there. So if you can see one of my if you call one of my colleagues and then get them to get some details and tell me when you're in next, and then I'll email you with when we can meet. Okay. All right then. Bye.
So this is the hot seat. This is where you'll be working from. When you present, you'll be moving here. All right. It's for me. All right. All right. No worries. It's here.
Oh, it's there, sorry.
Then we'll swap back again. I'll just kind of moderate all the questions.
Okay, Wanda's just logging on now. Ah! Hey there. Yeah, good. I look forward to catching up. I'm back at Christmas. Catching up. I'm back at Christmas, before Christmas. Or, okay. Can you hear me? No, that's me. Oh. Has she got her microphone down? Ah.
All right, is that better? No, I can't hear you. Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Can you hear me? You can? Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, no worries.
I
Sounds
can
good.
hear her.
Yeah.
Right, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today, whether you're here in the Palmerston Lecture Theatre at Solent or whether you're watching us on the live stream. It's our very first event of this nature that we have done ever, and so it's all quite experimental, but I've got every confidence we're going to have a great discussion here today. My name is Karina Buckley, and I'm the Instructional Design Manager at Solent. And I would like to start today just to explore some of the opportunities and affordances that technology can provide in the pursuit of teaching and learning, and how we can produce truly effective blended learning experience. And speaking of technology, I really must thank my colleague Paul Maple, who has worked incredibly hard to gerrymander all of this technology together today, and we have 3 people on Skype and a live stream, and it's amazing. So that is great work. Okay, so my task, my role is to roll out blended learning across the university. But can we agree on what that is? Can we agree on what the best way to do that might be? Is this something that staff are going to be able to do? And are we sure it's going to have a positive impact on students? So to get ourselves close to these answers, we brought together a panel of experts, all working in slightly different ways, but all of whom have deliberately and successfully taken a approach. What we'll do is hear from each of them in turn and give them the opportunity to respond to each other's practice if they want to. And then we're going to open the floor to any questions. And if you have any questions at any point and you don't want to wait in, then please just tweet them to Solent Learning on Twitter and use the hashtag BLLive, which was also used by the British Library last night, but never mind. I'm fairly sure I'll be able to identify which are your questions. Okay, so we have 5 panellists today. I'd like to introduce first of all Claire Saunders. She is a senior lecturer in learning and teaching at Southampton University. She's worked in education for over 20 years, beginning as a primary school teacher before moving into teacher training and finally joining higher education as Solent instructional designer last summer. Now in her new role, she teaches on PG Cert, which we are both taking as an opportunity for her team and mine to collaborate more closely. Then we'll hear from Claire Hughes, who is the course leader for the Chartered Management Degree Apprenticeship, BA Honours Business Management and BA Honours Enterprise. Claire's been at Solent since 2010, beginning as an associate lecturer in the business school, and since January this year she's led on the development and delivery of these courses with a particular eye on student employability. She contributes to the non-standard division, what we call non-standard division in school, and is keen to develop understanding of blended learning and how it then we'll hear from Dr. Sheila Yuff, the Head of Student Experience and Academic Outcomes at London Metropolitan University. Sheila undertook a professional doctorate in biomedical sciences, investigated the impact of blended learning on student satisfaction. This builds on the pedagogical action research that contributed towards her award of the PG DIP in Learning and Teaching. As an educational practitioner and blended learning champion, Sheila is particularly interested in developing novel e-learning teaching tools for biomedical. And then we are moving, I'm quite excited about this, we are moving to Canada to hear from Christina Dinsmore, an instructional designer at Queen's University in Ontario. Christina has over 15 years experience of teaching in higher education, as well as private sector experience in business startups and operations in the telecoms. She has also been external examiner for 2 UK-based online degree programs and developed and run business degree programs in both an on-campus and blended environment. Her main focus is in embedding authentic and work-related learning opportunities in course design to enhance the student experience and their employability. And she's going to be co-presenting with her colleague Wanda Bayer, who is also an instructional designer at Queen's University in Ontario. Wanda supports faculty colleagues in the development of online and blended courses. For nearly a decade, her work has focused on assisting teaching staff in multiple facilities to use innovative practice and technologies to engage learners. Her interests include designing large-scale blended courses and learning more about the transformation of instruction to our new online. So this is our panel. I'm really pleased to have all of them here today. And to get us started, I'd like to hand over to our first case study, which is by Claire Hughes. No, it's not. I'm sorry, Claire, don't panic. Claire Saunders will be the first.
Great, thanks, Karina. There's a bit of moving of chairs, first of all, so sit back down again. So we've been asked to just present something of our own work in the area of blended learning, and I think my most successful use of blended learning to date was actually on a PGCE course in another institution that I recently came from. And one of the modules in that course was all about using technology in teaching. And I was faced with the first group to ever take that module in our institution, and most of them would, by their own confession, regard themselves as either novice users or reluctant adopters of that technology. And so what I needed to do was try and find a way of not just engaging them in technology themselves, but getting them to be prepared to use that technology with their own students. So what I did was designed a series of in-class tasks that allowed students to actually explore the potential uses of technology for their own needs and then think about how they might use those with their own students. So we started off by thinking of a particular issue that they wanted to address in their own teaching. So we started from where they were at, really, and tried to think about how they might use technology in order to help them to resolve that problem. And one of the things that they came up with, and that was quite a common factor, was that they felt that they wanted their students to collaborate with one another and to do that actively and with a real enthusiasm, and to enhance their learning in that way. But they felt that that was often something that didn't happen and wasn't very successful. So what we did was, as a group together in class, we identified a number of applications, free ones, that they might use both for synchronous and asynchronous collaboration with their students. And then what I did was set them a task to work off campus and actually use that tool themselves to collaborate with one another and to then prepare a review of the tool that they then posted on the course forum. So what we'd done there was started off in class, thought about the task, and then taken that outside of the classroom and started to use the tools that were available to them to do the very thing that they wanted to be able to do with their students. And when they fed back onto the forum, some really interesting things happened. First of all, we were able to use their forum reviews as a real springboard for the next face-to-face session. And secondly, the quality of the discussion on the forum began to move from very limited to something that was actually about the students' learning, and they were commenting on one another's work and beginning to think about how they might apply those technologies in their own practice. Now, what happened then was that the assignment for that module involved them creating an activity or a learning object for their own students that encouraged them to use technology. And what happened was that a number of students began to use the tools that we trialed in class and design activities for their own students that used those same tools. So in a sense, their own learning was very applied in this way, and they began to reuse the things that they'd learned in different contexts. So they were really beginning to think for themselves about how to use technology in their own practice. And one of the really encouraging things as a teacher, of course, when you've done something like that, is to see their feedback and their responses. And a number of feedback comments at the end of the module included students who admitted that they'd moved from a real position of being quite skeptical about the use of technology to not just feeling a bit better about it, but actively using it in their own practice. So from that really practical example, it got me thinking about, okay, so what are some of the key features of blended learning that maybe made that work for those particular students? And I think one of the things that struck me was that we made some really intentional choices about the things that we were going to use the face-to-face environment for and the things that we were going to use the online environment for. So we thought quite carefully about what it was we wanted to learn and the best way of doing that in each case. So it was very intentional that certain things were done in class and then certain things were done using the technology. And I also tried quite hard to seamlessly integrate those two environments so that things that will be done online fed back into the classroom and vice versa. So things that we'd done in class then led into tasks that they did during the course of the week. And what I think that the students gained from that was, well, a number of things really. I think in this specific case, I think the teachers were involved in teacher training themselves. So they were students in this context, but they were also working with students themselves. And what I think we did then was modelled a way for them in which blended learning might work. So they saw it in practice, they saw the benefits of it for their own learning, and then they thought about how that might transfer into the ways of working with their own students. I think they also had a great degree of flexibility in their own learning. So they had a high level of autonomy in deciding when they would collaborate with their peers, when they would complete the online tasks, and also because of the things that they did online and the posts that they put on the forum, those things then began to shape what we did in class the following week. So we actually began to use their learning on the forum and online and reshape the content of the face-to-face classes in response to that. And I think in a broader sense, I then began to develop the whole of the VLE for that module. And it started to address some of the challenges of a group who, for me, only attended the college once a week. So they were only actually physically in the building once a week. They weren't there day in, day out. They weren't full-time students. And so what we worked hard to do then was to make the VLE their first port of call for information and for their ongoing activities. The biggest advantage of this for me was that my email inbox became much less cluttered because they began to ask and answer questions for themselves via the forums. We also used a checklist on the VLE, which meant that they were clear what they needed to do each week and they could keep track themselves and organise their time accordingly. So it was all good, except obviously sometimes it didn't all go as swimmingly as that, and it would be unfair to present it as if it did. Sometimes the technology failed. There's no, sometimes the VLE went down, they couldn't access it, they forgot their password, they swore blind that they hadn't, all of that kind of stuff happened. And also, I sometimes overestimated their competence and mine in being able to use the technology efficiently. And so there were sometimes quite major elements of problem solving that went on in the class to try and make things work. The advantage of that, of course, is if you've got students that are confident, they begin to help you, and it becomes a learning process for everyone. No matter how sociable I made the online community space, students would still resort to WhatsApp and Facebook or similar, because it was a place where they can talk without the tutor present. And I learned to accept this, not get stressed about it. What I tried to do was make my presence on the VLE a reason for them to use this too. So this was where they got official answers to their questions, where the discussion about learning took place, and where they could access resources for their studies. And making that distinction between the social and the learning space, in my mind, and I think in theirs, I think helped to overcome what initially felt like a problem. So moving on from that specific case to some more general implications, I think that a blended approach where the use of the VLE is central is a really good way to develop independence in learning and to sustain a community beyond the classroom. It definitely opens up a wider range of learning and teaching activities than are available just in face-to-face sessions. But there are issues of time and also, for me, what counts as teaching. So let me unpack that a bit. Front loading is an issue. The setting up of a blended program is very labour intensive at the start. And one of the things I found that I was doing this mostly by myself, and a massive advantage of coming to Solent, has been the ability to work with a team in that process of setting up the blended learning environment. So here I'm working as a lecturer, but I have instructional design and learning technologists that can work with me. And that beauty of that collaboration is something that helps that labour-intensive process to feel less lonely. That obviously needs to be planned. There needs to be buy-in from the top of an institution, I think, that this is how planning for learning happens. It's a collaborative endeavour, and that needs to be embedded in the thinking of the organisation if it's going to work really effectively. The other issue for me was, so for example, if I'm moderating and developing discussion on a forum, or if I'm running tutorials on a web conferencing system, or any of a whole host of other activities that I would class as blended learning, the question at a higher level in the institution is, are those things seen as part of my teaching hours? So I'd want to argue that they are, but I'm not sure that that's a really universal view. So again, that's about institutional practices and flexibility in terms of what is it that we call teaching? What does that look like? And what counts as teaching? And how's that reflected in our workload? Those could be seen as problems or barriers, but I actually think they're really good conversations to have. And the reason I think that is because I think they challenge us to go beyond our current practices and to explore new ways of working. Thank you.
Very much, Claire.
Lifting again, are we?
Have your chair back.
Well done.
Saves to any I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but any responses from any of the panelists on anything that you heard Claire talking about? Oh, Sheila, yeah.
Hi. I actually think it's a really good idea using collaborative tools to try and engage the students there. I've done a similar type of thing, but the talk inspired me to maybe change what we do a little bit here and try and engage them more into teaching them about the tools that they can do to expand the work that they do.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true, being able to involve students. Oh, all right. Thank you. Now it's Claire Hughes. I will hand over, more adequately prepared enough.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I've taught blended learning units for the last 5 years, and I thought it was useful perhaps for some of you joining us online and in the room to just understand some basics about the learning experience I've had in my own blended learning journey. So I naively took over a unit which was on a blended learning top-up 5 years ago. And the reason I was quite naive was I suddenly realised that potentially my materials could be seen as IT rich really at best, rather than in a true blended learning pedagogy. They were very static. And when I kind of reviewed back once I knew a bit more about blended learning, I realised that I hadn't actually been servicing my students very well at all. So I spent the next 5 years really building up my knowledge and working out actually what students like or don't like in blended learning. Because the one true thing I really have learned is that it doesn't matter how many things have worked well with the previous cohort, the next cohort may not like those things. And even when you think you've got it cracked with the one cohort, suddenly something happens and you realise you need to change your planning again for that cohort. I've then been able to use that when we've rolled out our Chartered Management Degree Apprenticeship Programme, which is designed specifically in a blended learning format where the students come onto campus every 2 to 3 months. So actually being able to engage them in blended learning off-site and actually then valuing that as learning has been imperative for success. I'm also leading a team of people through that process, not just the students, but the staff as well. And they are really enjoying the experience and being able to try different things. So blended learning, for anybody that may perhaps is thinking, well, what does that actually mean? People keep talking about it. The term I like the best is it really is a marrying of online teaching practices with your standard teaching practices. It's the best of both worlds. And it simply is a way that you can engage your students and you can motivate them, you can communicate with them, and you can make it accessible to lots of different learning styles and individual learning requirements. For me personally, it allows me to push my own boundaries. I have to be innovative with my curriculum design. I have to constantly change. I have to be up to date with the learning technology tools, with the very kind help of my colleagues here at Solent in the Learning Technologies unit. So, first of all, I just wanted to spend a bit of time telling you why I think there's definite value added in using blended learning pedagogies. As I said, it not only motivates me, but it motivates my students to actually keep going off campus, that they feel as though they're in that community of learning off campus as well as when they're on campus with us. It enables us to give them a clear structure, as Claire mentioned, with the checklist. They can clearly see where they're heading when they're not on campus with us all of the time. It also allows them to self-blend. Yeah, I can engage and I can plan my learning for them, but actually it's important that they actually get the choice to self-blend and have an individual choice. So it's whether you put up a variety of videos, books, articles, forums. You give them a choice of whether they want to input into the forums, because some students really value that. Others won't engage. So, but some really like doing blogging instead of group forums. It really is a collaborative experience for them and for you. And you get to know them very quickly on a learning and personal level by delivering your learning in this way, in a blended learning style. And it is a catalyst for innovation, but as Claire mentioned, it's not just us as tutors, it's actually the students suddenly become quite innovative in their demands and how they want to learn with you as well. And it enhances theirs and your own IT skills. The one really important thing when it comes to blended learning is that it's not static material, and that was where I was 5 years ago. It's not a matter of simply putting lots of different varieties of learning up there for them. It's actually about engaging them and actually you engaging with them and them engaging each other as their own best peer support service. As Claire mentioned previously, that all sounds great, but there are always some challenges that come with any learning journey you're taking. Some won't engage, yeah, and don't take it personally. You can plan as many activities as you want, and for some people, it just doesn't fit how they feel comfortable about learning. There is the fear factor, yeah, whether that's because they're not sure how to use IT, whether that just seems very new. It can be quite overawing for them to suddenly see this whole scheme of work that they've actually got to work towards off-site as well. So it's how you carefully take them through that. There are limited prompt points. If you see students on a standard learning basis, you tend to be able to see them at least once a week. When they're off-site, you do have prompt points with them. You build it into your curriculum design, but it is harder to connect with them if they choose not to connect back with you. There is user error, you and them. There are access problems. We have, particularly on our blended learning units, people working literally all over the world, and their organisation own firewalls sometimes won't let the materials of your BLE in, and that can cause errors. I mentioned how you can build a community of learners, and that's actually harder than you think to actually instigate within the cohorts. And it can be very time consuming initially to set your program up in a blended learning style. You have to have a really clear vision and a clear focus of the learning points you want the students to take on board. So you have to think about your schedule. What are the important things that you need to do face to face that would be very difficult for a student to be able to do off-site? And then the off-site activities, debate how you're actually going to innovatively make sure that they understand what you're trying to get them to do when you're not there with them every week. So I think the things that I've learned over the time are what everyone will start facing when they start teaching the blended learning pedagogy. However, for me, the next phase of my learning, because you can never know everything about pedagogy, it moves on all of the time, is I really have now thought about how I reshape how I explain what I'm doing to students, because we don't know as professionals everything about blended learning. So how can they possibly understand our design behind the activities that we're doing for them? We can't presume that they know what that means and that we're scheduling activities to actually encourage their learning journey. So it's about educating them. And I do that right from the induction with my students now. And I talk through what blended learning is, the activities we'll be designing, and the support in place for them. I also have tried making it more collaborative by design, because as tutors, we can design our learning for them. But unless we actually include them as part of that discussion, we won't actually know what works for that cohort. So this time I have actually put up using a polling app, how they actually want to learn off-site. And that's been really eye-opening. It also brings together lots of tradition. I mentioned it's a marrying of online and standard teaching. And it's traditionally seen as a pedagogy for non-standard delivery. But I really do strongly believe that actually that's not true at all, and actually it is for non-traditional and traditional styles. And I've started to introduce that into the other courses that I run, so that actually, because at the end of the day, blended learning helps you engage and motivate and embed deep learning to your students. So why would you not want to do that across every course that you teach as well? Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions from any panelists?
Sure.
Christina, how nice. Please do.
Hi, Claire.
Hey.
So a question I would have is how you see the scalability of doing what you're doing now to larger numbers when you may not have that flexibility of working with the individual students in the sense that you know each one.
And I think that's where your learning technology tools come in, because you may not know each one, but you can actually collectively use polling tools. I connect through webinars with them as well, particularly around the assessment, because we give lots of information to our students about the assessments when we see them, but in between campus sessions, they can quite often forget the nuances of what you've told them. So webinars are an easy way to connect with the students off-site as well, and that is scalable.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Claire. Have your stuff down.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Sheila Huff at London Metropolitan University. So to see her on site. But Sheila, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's been interesting so far because it shows you just what blended learning is by listening to the previous two speakers, because I use elements of all of these things, and I think that's what's exciting about blended learning. It's not just one thing that you have to do. You can use multiple tools. You can set up organisational structures that provide a clear structure for students. One of the things I like to do is try to personalise some of the learning to the students. So when they go within our VLE, they can access the style of things in the way they like. So I put things up in several manners, and I say to them, okay, you've got your PowerPoint, there's a recorded lecture, but you might find this video clip helps you. You might find that these documents that I've put up help, and they can work their way through them. And I like to put in little assessment bits they can do that will then guide them to other materials. So those that are doing really well can get things that help them expand and improve their learning. And those that are struggling, I might take them back a step and take them there. So I don't have to be with them when they're doing those bits, because they often feel in a live environment too shy to say, I don't really know what you're talking about, or I've got lost, I've missed that beginning step. So I like to sort of develop the organisational areas in the VLE to help guide them through. And then we use collaborative tools to, when we do revision sessions, they can either be with us, they can be, miles sat at home and doing it, but they can type in the questions to us without actually being the one who puts their hand up. So it enables them to engage without feeling that they might be ostracised by their classmates because they think their question is stupid. And I always say the only question that's stupid is the one you don't ask, because I bet you half the class feel the same way. So it gives them that anonymity to be able to join in. So I think that's what's really good about using lots of these tools, in the fact that they can either be a lurker and watch what everybody else is doing and gain what they want from that, or actually participate without feeling that they're exposing themselves. So I've done quite a lot of that there. So I also have used the VLE to get students to communicate across the whole of their degree. So the first years can engage with things with the second and the third years, because we set up a big environment that they can then all communicate with each other. And it sustains things like our success coaches. We have success coaches who go and do things with different years to their year to help them support their learning, and so they get to know their success coaches through this environment before they go and meet them. And we've got more people who want to be success coaches because they've got this environment where they can see that they can help somebody else, and it's actually a good thing to be doing, rather than thinking they have to be some sort of goody two-shoes to want to volunteer. They realise that they can be involved in the bit they understand, and they don't have to do things that they're not so confident about as well. So I'm quite keen on using sort of like this whole big blend of things to be able to help them. And I think the fact that they can join asynchronously to things and catch up and do work really helps, in the fact that these days our students are so busy. We have students who, when I did a timetabling study recently, are working just over 20 hours a week. Well, on a full-time course, that's another 3 days at work. So as far as I'm concerned, that leaves them like 1 or 2 days a week that they might be able to settle down and do their work. So I think they like being able to access the other material at points that suit them in their lifestyles. I think we've moved away from years ago when people went full-time to university, maybe had a bar job in the evening to earn some money. But I think nowadays students are under much, much bigger pressure. So by blending our learning opportunities, I think we give them a much better opportunity of engaging with their courses, engaging with each other, but not necessarily having to meet up and do that group work physically together. They can do it online together and actually be updating things in live time with each other. So that's the area that I really enjoy using blended learning for.
That's really, I mean, that's interesting that you say that the success coach program has been so successful or popular that people are actually wanting to join it. I think I probably speak to several colleagues in this room who don't know how to get students to do things like that. Do you think the fact that it is online is a specific factor in that? Do you think that there is that online space? It helps.
I think there's the online space that they can get to know each other, and then they have the live sessions. The students are, available in different rooms at different times for different subjects they're doing. But I think there's the fact that they can communicate a little bit beforehand makes them feel more confident. So they can say, oh, I'd like to talk to you about this if I come. And of course the success coach goes, yes, come, and that'd be really nice, and I'll talk to you about that there. And so I think it just helps sort of break that barrier down of first making friends with somebody that they don't know. And when they see somebody in the year above, sometimes they're a bit shy and think, oh, well, they know everything and I don't. And usually what they find is they can exchange information between each other. They find support because we all have different skills, don't we? And sometimes we're better at doing them than others.
Is that an online space that you feel needs particular staff input to keep it going, or is that something that students have really taken off and run with by themselves?
They've developed it much more on our organisation, but I think it's because we initially sort of like triggered a lot of things at the beginning of the academic year. We always do a little bit more triggering, but now we've had the organisation running for a few years. There's more background on there and students can see it and begin to participate. And of course, when they move from first year to second year to third year, they're expecting it to be there. So when they meet the new lot of intake, they're saying, oh, you go on there and you do this, as though it's part of what they should be looking at and engaging with.
I think your point about accessibility is absolutely right, though. Particularly on my apprenticeship program, they all work full time as well as studying. So it's tough, and life sometimes gets in the way, and they can't make a certain lecture. So you have to actually build that kind of backup plan into your program. So we have Nocto, where we record everything, so they can actually catch up afterwards as well if they happen to miss something.
Yeah, I think that flexibility, isn't it? Sorry, Sheila. Carry on.
No, I was going to say, I think that's what's nice is they can catch up with it, and you can also track if they've missed too many sessions. You can actually then engage with them and find out what is it that's stopping them. Are they just trying to default to it? But since we've started recording, we don't see much difference in attendance because everybody said it would drop off. But we don't really see that. We see the students using it as a backup tool and a help when they come to revision time. They can go back over things, even if they were sitting in the class live first time. It gives them the option to fast forward. You always know which bit they didn't understand because you can see where they start watching.
Are there any other questions or comments from any of the panelists or Sheila? All right. Okay, thank you very much. That was great. Hear your perspective on that. So thanks. And now finally, we're going to hand over to Christina Dinsmore and Wanda Bayer in Ontario. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So Wanda and I are going to play tag a little bit and talk about what we've been doing at Queen's. I just want to give you a quick intro. We're both instructional designers, as you mentioned. Wanda's background here has had an awful lot of blended learning experience, which is great. So she's going to talk a little bit about how it all works here and the structure and things like that. And I'm just going to briefly go over why we are where we are, and then talk later on about some of the challenges and the benefits we found. So blended learning at Queen's came out of a need identified from two instructors for large traditional lecture style classes where they found that students just weren't engaging, they weren't showing up. And also our national student engagement survey results also indicated the same. So it kind of came out of a grassroots level trying to figure out a way to get students to engage. And that's really where the whole project started. So I'm going to hand over, Wanda, to you just to talk about how it's all been set up and everything, and then I'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to talk a little bit about
my focus as an instructional designer on working on these large-scale courses. And we're looking at courses that are anywhere from 400 students to 2,000 students. So our approach to developing these courses is a bit different. It has to be pretty structured because we find that if it's not, then we lose students along the way and it becomes a lot more work for the instructors. So I'm just going to talk through that a little bit and reiterate some of the things that I heard from the other panelists present this morning. So when we started this blended learning project back in, I think, 2013, it was a little bit before my time, the instructors had us submit a proposal and give some evidence or describe how they would incorporate blended learning best practices into the course that they wanted to redesign. And based on those proposals, they were approved by a committee. And so we were working with instructors who really wanted to do blended learning, who are invested in the ideology and the pedagogy of blended learning. So I think that is a really important factor, that we find instructors who want to go in this direction. So it's not a top-down sort of model. And the next thing we do, and I think other speakers have reiterated this in several different ways, is that you work with a team of people. So myself as the instructional designer, a multimedia person, we have a learning management specialist who takes care of the technology end. We bring in resource librarians so that they can bring in different components to the course as well and create some ways for the instructors to be able to create how we do research and how do we look into those databases, because we are dealing with first and second year students who haven't been introduced to those things. So it really does take a whole team to put these courses together, and we typically start 9 months to a year out from when the course is being offered. And like any course, we start with the course learning outcomes and the assessments. To me, those are the real key factors to look at. And then we do that backwards design, right? So we're looking at then developing, the weekly sort of outcomes as well as scaffolding in the various assignments so that by the time they get to that big culminating activity, they've already had a little practice within their tutorials. So then once we get those pieces on board, it's really it's very much intentional choices about where goes what. And I think the first panelist, Claire, had mentioned that you are really intentional about how you blend the actual course. I spend a lot of time up front with instructors one-on-one just talking about the whole idea of active learning, because when the students are in their tutorials, it's really important that they're engaged, that it's not just here's an article and discuss, but that they're engaged in a small group of students. This little group stays together the entire term, and they're working together in active learning classrooms, which is a pretty cool component to what we have here. So we have classrooms designed just for these blended learning courses that have interactive whiteboards. They have computers that screens can be shared amongst students. The lecturer or the tutorial leader can share their main screen with all the other screens in the classroom. And then there's their tables are set up as well to work collaboratively because they're round or they're small, and they're not sitting in a lecture hall. So we're really fortunate to have those classrooms. In terms of the tutorials themselves, they're typically marked so that students do get a mark for coming. It's not just attendance. There's some sort of participation as well as a component at the end that they have to turn in as a group. Typically, to prepare them for tutorials, we ask that the students complete some sort of pre-tutorial activity, such as a quiz that they would take online, something that they may submit to the discussion forum. But that is just our way to say, okay, you've read the course material, you've gone to the lecture if there is one, you know what's happening, so they're prepared when they come into that tutorial to work in their small groups to be able to really move forward and extend their thinking about whatever the topic is for that week, so they can really dig deep and get into that active learning. Let's see, what else? So that's sort of the tutorial development, and there is a lot of resources that go into that. So not only into the design when I work with an instructor, but we also have a number of TAs, or I guess tutorial leaders that are in the tutorials that are also trained to be able to engage students in those conversations and monitor what's happening in those. Then there's the discussion of what goes online and what goes into lecture. So we really look at it 3 parts. We have the lecture, the tutorials, and then the online components of the course. Lectures are variable for each course. It depends on the instructor. We find from the feedback from our students that they really have this mindset that when they come to university, that university is all about 3 lectures a week. So one of our biggest hurdles is breaking down that barrier. The instructors always start the term with explaining why we use blended learning, with the rationale, how the course components work, how they marry with one another. So we give them that mindset up front. And so the instructors that do maintain a lecture tend to do it as a just-in-time teaching tool. So as I mentioned, students typically take some sort of an online quiz each week, and then the instructors will use the feedback from that quiz to determine what they're going to cover in lecture, to really make sure that we're getting at any gaps in learning and understanding. Also within the lecture, the instructors tend to use some sort of interactive tool, such as Top Hat. So the students are accountable for coming to lecture, and they also have to engage in the lecture through polling questions or other sorts of questions that they can answer on their handheld devices or on their laptops as well. And the online content then is really the material. So there's 2 pieces. It's any material that the instructor can develop ahead of time that's really sort of that acquisition of knowledge. So typically there may be a voiceover PowerPoint that has interactive questions. It may be an e-textbook that has interactive components within it. So there may be little quizzes or drop and drag or hotspots activities that are built into the interactive content. So that's one piece. Then there's also the just online component itself, where there may be discussion forums that, students are engaging in conversation prior to the tutorial or within the tutorial itself. There may be blogs that the students are responsible for. So there's a lot of variety of ways. It all goes back to what are the learning outcomes and how do we measure and meet those learning outcomes within a course. So each course is designed just a little bit different with a little different flair. And then at the end, we do evaluations. And I shouldn't say at the end, but evaluations are done throughout. We do exit tickets at the end of each of the tutorials. So students fill out a mini survey that typically has a list of the learning outcomes for that week. And they then sort of rate those learning outcomes from, yes, I really get this, or not quite sure, I have no idea what's going on. And then there's always an open-ended question that may focus on takeaways, muddiest points, or, for example, how did the readings prepare you for this week? So instructors are trying to get different sorts of feedback throughout the course. Midway through the course, we do sort of a bigger evaluation for the students that, again, is online, where we ask them to, say, what supports in the course are you using and that are helping you learn? So are you taking advantage of rewatching the videos? Do you come to the live help sessions? Do you use the online help sessions? So we get a sense of what's working in that specific course and what's not. And another panelist had mentioned really getting to know your cohort and how your cohort changes. And so that's part of the reason we do that midterm, because if we need to change something midstream, it allows us that flexibility. And then at the end of the course, we have a standard unit of measurement that's used here called the USAT. And it's the student feedback, did you like this course? What did you like this course? Was your instructor, an excellent instructor? Those sorts of questions. And that feedback is all consolidated at the end and shared with the instructor in a tool that we use to fine tune the course. So that's sort of an overall of how we design our blended learning courses here.
Okay, so just a little bit about the challenges that we face and the benefits. So first of all, let's start with the benefits. We do find that from a student point of view, we have an increase in engagement. There's much more flexibility and the students are more engaged, and the numbers are showing that. So the feedback from the students in the NESI scores and through some of the mechanisms that Wanda talked about, the numbers are showing that. Having a learner-centered approach has definitely helped, and it also, our flexibility is then increased. Okay, students can go at their own pace online, and they feel they have much more control. And this, the student instructor interaction is also more positively rated by students. So they feel that there is more contact and that they are engaged in that contact that happens. I've also reported things like an increase in writing skills and the collaborative learning. And the collaborative learning is always something that is a challenge, especially if you're moving it to the online aspect. But we seem to be able to do that. And students generally will engage in that. They don't usually have a choice, and we often in our online element, if there are activities that the instructor wants to do, we have, a huge range of what we do. We do role plays, negotiation activities, all sorts of different things. From an instructor point of view, it's good because class time can be freed up. And it also allows the flexibility from the instructor point of view to actually, look at where the learning and where the needs are, so they can tailor it in that, as Wanda said, in that just-in-time manner. And it's a really effective way for large classes. Remember, this came out of a need from large classes, right? So, and we have found that it has helped to engage students where those traditional methods haven't. From a faculty point of view, there's capital savings. There isn't the money being spent on new buildings, new classrooms. They're able to more effectively use the resources, so there's economies of scale. And it's an effective way of increasing the enrollment that we have in these courses, and especially for the online element, because when the blended ones are developed, there's an equivalent online course that's developed as well. So the materials are there, you've got those economies of scale, and the online, if you're having a dedicated online course, you're then you've got not only the economies, but you've got the new numbers. Whereas on the blended version, those students are often the same. They will be the same students that are already paying their fees. The online ones are those are the students you're looking to bring in the new business, because they may not be based here. So there's definitely some benefits there. Some of the challenges have already been mentioned. You got to have the flexible spaces, and that one size doesn't always fit all. So you have to be able to tailor, not only just to the student, to the content, but to the instructor. And it's been mentioned by a couple of the other panelists that, where the instructor is on that journey varies. So it's, it's difficult to bring them along sometimes. So identifying those touch points where you can help with that. We have really good resources. So to me, that's one of the reasons we succeed. So we have instructional designers who are just doing this. 2 of our instructional designers are remotely based, or 3 of them are remotely based. So they're not even in Kingston, which is, really good, because we can actually practice what we preach in terms of how we develop the materials. Some of the tips I would have, development takes time. Wanda said we allow sort of 6 to 9 months, 2 terms, that sort of thing. It takes time. And maintenance of the courses takes time. And I think, some of the ones I think, Wanda, that you've been working on have taken 3 years to get right. So there's a lot.
We're always working on them. They never end.
And it's a change in the traditional way of teaching for a lot of instructors. Although you could argue that a lot of instructors do adopt this just in time, as in the night before teaching. But this idea of just in time coming from what the student actually wants and where they are is a change and shift. It's not but I've always done it like this, and this is how I'm going to continue to do it. In the flipped classroom as well, which effectively is what this is, you can't assume. So it's not only can you not assume that the instructors know what they're doing, you can't assume that the students do either. So that initial induction, working with the students, setting the goals, the objectives, becomes really, really important. And that one of the biggest things we found is that the online element is not just a repository. It's not the death by scrolling in Moodle or in D2L or whatever people are using. It has to actually add value as well. And that's a big shift too. And finally, really getting the instructors to get round the idea of everything being prepared before the course launches, because that's not how they're used to doing things. And they're not used to spending that time in the design and the pedagogy. And so getting them to think like that, the angle we use is that if that's done, then you have more time to spend with the students in the online environment adopting this approach. I think that was really all we had top points to talk about.
All right. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. That was really insightful as well, to hear about something such a enormous scale and the necessity of doing what you're doing as well. The amount of planning and forward preparation. It's not a quick culture change. That's not something just. I mean, how do you introduce a change like that?
Well, I think Wanda mentioned that, first of all, for the blended learning project, for the course redesign that we had looked at initially, these were, first of all, it came out of a grassroots level, so there was buy-in there. And even when we develop just courses now, as a rule, instructors are having to go through some sort of vetting process with their departments, so there's buy-in. And that's really important to do. I mean, Wanda, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add on that is initially with the blended learning project, when it first started, there was also incentive financially for these instructors to be able to do that. So they received some funding to develop these courses early, or to use those resources to hire a research assistant to assist them with the development. And I think that really made a huge difference, because it's an undertaking. It's not an easy thing to do when you're working on such a large course, and to think about starting it so early and to compared to what you normally do when you teach a course. So I think that helped. And the other thing that helped is that we had bi-weekly or monthly meetings where we'd bring in some sort of professional development for these instructors. And they could also sit together and say, oh, this is really frustrating. What are you doing about that? So they could network with other faculties, people in other faculties that they normally didn't get to network with. So that was another thing I think that really helped.
I was going to say, I think that's it's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think sometimes it can be, there was the financial incentive, which I think can sometimes help, and the fact there's funding and time and space to do it. And I think as well, I was just thinking of a situation we had very recently with a lecturer who'd taken on a module. She had a number of students out on work-based learning. There was a lot of them, and there was that need to actually communicate with them and set something up that was going to support them. So that kind of, the incentive came from the need to do something different. And that can often be the catalyst for trying something new. So I think for instructional design teams in particular, it's being able to build relationships with lecturers so you can pick up on when those needs are emerging and actually sort of step in and help, because we ended up therefore redesigning that unit in a way that she was really happy with and keen to take on from there. So I think sometimes it can come from that problem in your teaching that needs to be solved, and suddenly there's a blended solution to that, which makes you excited enough to try it differently with another group of students, and it sort of snowballs from there.
Yeah, and I would add to that when the courses are in offering, so when they're being delivered, I also meet with my instructors on a weekly basis, even if it's just for half an hour to check in, and we're on email constantly. But even that face-to-face check-in with the instructors I find to be really, really important, because they just need some place to vent their frustrations or their challenges, and someone to help them problem solve through it.
Yeah, good point.
I think the other thing is that the instructors now, I mean, the word is out on the street, so to speak, that if they develop a course, whether, whichever aspect of, say, the blended learning one it is, if it's blended learning or if it's just the online version, the word's out that there's a team there to support them, right? So we're getting, again, you get less resistance every time.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of thing. As soon as people hear that others are doing it and they've survived and everything's all right, then maybe it's something they could do as well. Maybe.
That's right. They survived and they got money for developing it.
Yeah, that's the important message, but not one we're going to spread at Solent, I don't think. Although that would be fun to do, just see what happens.
But it's also pretty cool, some of the things you can do in your learning management system, right? And the design and making the whole thing appealing. So we have graphic designers that will help us to do that. We've got a master's program that's completely online, and we've made it look completely different to the undergrad programs, in line with the branding. And that's also important, because that then makes the instructors, part of that brand. So, and that trickles through.
I just wonder out for the people out there that are maybe now thinking, perhaps I want to dip my toe into the blended learning pedagogy. What do you think are the biggest development things that they can be working on within their own institutions? Did you hear?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
So for people that you said that you work very closely with your instructors there, what do you think are your top tips for anybody thinking about maybe dipping their toe in the blended learning pedagogy?
Well, I think some of the things Wanda's mentioned are critical. That it's about, first of all, what support can you give to the instructors, right? Because most of them don't initially want to do it. They don't usually come to you wanting to do this. Saying that, Blended Learning Project, and Wanda can jump in on this, is that it came from that grassroots level.
Yeah.
So it's about the support, and it's about demystifying the technology, which is one of the reasons why we have the team. So I mean, we've moved from Moodle to D2L, which has been a whole new learning curve for us, but it's not a disaster because we've got a team that knows how to use them. So we really go to them and say, we want to run a negotiation activity online over 3 weeks or something like that, and they say, right, okay, this is how we can do it. Wanda, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to that, and now I just lost my train of thought. My coffee hasn't kicked in yet this morning. Where was I going to go with that thought? It'll come back to me and then I'll jump in. Sorry about that one. Christina, you talked too long.
Wanda, one of the things I was just going to pick up on that you said, which I thought was really helpful, and I'd be interested to hear a bit more about how you do it, was the importance of explaining the rationale to students rather than just giving them this course in a blended format and assuming that they will understand why that's happened, what's the best way to do it, and so on and so forth. It's that very intentional explanation of we're doing it this way because, and it'd just be interesting to hear a bit more about how you did that.
Actually, we ended up doing it we did it 2 ways. We do it first in a lecture. The opening lecture, we explain to the students, and we actually have some icons that we use to represent what's happening online, what's happening, face-to-face, and then what's happening in tutorial. And then the other ways, we use those same icons then throughout the course as well, so students always key into those. The other thing that we do within tutorial itself, the very first tutorial exercise that we have is a group activity, and then they have to go in and do a group syllabus quiz or a scavenger hunt, so to speak, within the learning management system and within the tutorial itself, so they start to understand how these parts move together. And I remembered my thought that I forgot. The other thing that I was going to say is really important is that we meet instructors where they're at. So when we think about technology, instructors can be very overwhelmed by the thought of that. And so when I work with an instructor, I really try to get a sense from that initial meeting, what do they want this course to look like and be like, and what do they want their students to come out with at the end? And through that conversation, and it's usually just the instructor and I, so that we kind of get that nice cozy environment. Sometimes it's over a cup of coffee or tea, just to get their sense of a course. And I always tell my instructors, I will never push you out of your comfort zone without proper support. And so if I have an instructor who's really keen on technology, well, then we can give them a whole bunch of different things because we know they're really competent with it. But when I have an instructor, for example, right now, who is afraid to use just the virtual Dropbox within the learning management system, I know that I can't ask that instructor to go very far. And so it really is sort of taking them on a journey, but with very, very good support and very methodical in the approach that we use with them.
Cool.
And if I can just add one thing there, is that what we're now looking at is, so we've kind of gone the reverse way, and that we've gone from large classes, and so now we're looking at field-based courses, what you would call a unit. So field-based units, and how we can use the blended approach in that. And those are for instructors generally that want nothing to do with online or blended. They just want to, because it's just getting out in the field. So that's sort of the next thing to come, and we're kind of going the other way.
That sounds like a fun challenge.
I'm glad it's Christina's and not mine.
All right, if I would like to open up the floor to any questions. If anybody would like to ask any of our panel members anything burning? Smouldering? Lorraine? Yes, ask away. We have microphones. Hopefully you can hear. If you can't, I'll repeat it anyway. Hello. Oh,
I just wanted to ask, thanks so much for the insights into the courses that you deliver. I was really interested in the idea of the weekly surveys that you do with the students, and I wondered about uptake and if they actually were, sorry, moving off track focus, but I'm trying to think of, did they actually complete those surveys, and what kind of feedback did you get? Was it quite hard to kind of get them to complete that?
Did you hear that okay?
Sorry.
So the question was, and I guess it could be open to all 5, student evaluation and feedback on your courses or online activities. Do they do it? Do they complete it? What kind of feedback do you get? Sheila, jump in.
We've got 2 types of cohorts. The ones that are online only students tend to be the ones that will complete everything when it's online, and for students who come in and do more face-to-face, I find the old-fashioned bit of paper in front of them gets more of a response than doing anything online.
That's really fascinating, actually. Yeah,
I think I would agree with that. I think with my particular the case that I was talking about, I put the feedback online, but I made them complete it in class. It was a face-to-face class activity. The other thing I would add there, the other thing I did as well, was I would use we use Moodle here, and I would use the tools in Moodle to track what the students were doing as well. Not just in terms of me looking to see what they were doing, but as a springboard for me then to ask questions about, a number of you have used this, why was that helpful? Nobody's accessed this, why wasn't it? So I think it can be useful to use the information that's available to you as well as speaking to the students. I think those 2 things together can be really useful.
Yeah. I specifically gave them a few weekends of using, or a few months of using the tools, and then actually had a poll of what they were finding useful and what they weren't, because there was no point me continuing down routes that they just were not going to engage in.
And I can say for us, the exit tickets they complete right at the end of tutorial, which is face-to-face, so they know it's sort of the last piece that they have to finish before they leave tutorial. And even for the large midterm sort of survey that we do, that again is at the end of tutorial. And then the very end evaluation that they do at the course is a paper-based evaluation, so they do it in tutorial with other students who monitor that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Matching the evaluation method to the mode of delivering it. I guess, yeah. That's fascinating. Any other questions from the room? Roger.
Hi. It's National Stress Awareness Day today. I noticed on Twitter, which must be a good day for you, running this session. What impact, and I'm just thinking about reports recently of increase of mental health issues undergraduates are experiencing. What impact does blended learning have on student stress, mental health? Is it good, bad, or otherwise?
Interesting. Just in case you didn't hear that clearly enough online, it's National Stress Awareness Day today, so obviously we've timed this well. I'm going to sleep so well tonight, I can tell you. Do we know what might be the impact of blended learning on student mental health, student stress?
I don't know the statistics.
You want to jump in?
I think some of my observations, though, would be that it can both be good and bad, as many things are. So I think, if the technology is not working, or they feel that they're out of their comfort zone, and I think this is true for students and tutors, then the stress levels will rise. And that's why I'm interested in some of the things Wanda's saying about that one-to-one with a tutor, and the cup of coffee always goes down well with me, and the opportunity to start from where they're at. And I think we need to do that with students as well. I think we can be guilty of making the assumption that our students are very tech savvy, so they don't need our help. And I think they might be very tech savvy in their social life. They haven't yet necessarily worked out how that can be well used in their educational life, and that's our responsibility to do that. However, I've also seen students who don't engage in other ways, particularly students with mental health, who really enjoy the anonymity of a forum post, or being able to lurk in that forum and not necessarily contribute. And students that for those reasons and others take longer to process information can really find that asynchronous communication tool very helpful. So I don't know the statistics, but I just think anecdotally, I think there are things to think about, both positive and negative.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think it gets really important then to make sure that your instructors know how to use the system. If let's say you're trying to, let's say a student isn't showing up for the tutorials, but you can go online and see what they're doing in the online environment, right? So use the basket of tools to get the full picture. And Moodle will give you that sort of information. You can see how they're, what they're looking at, things like that. So there are other ways to do it, but it does come down to the instructor, and most instructors are really comfortable in the face-to-face, but not so comfortable on the other side, right? And it's that other side, as Claire mentioned, that maybe they feel more comfortable, students with any sort of accommodation issues, right? We also make a point too of having all accommodation letters put on file that we can see, so that as instructional designers, we know to jog the instructors if there are issues.
Thanks all. Any other questions in the room? All right, that's fine. Did you have one? No? Right, we've got a few on Twitter, which is very exciting. There was a question around, do you advocate separating or integrating your VLE with social media tools? What do you think would work best? Sheila, jump on in.
Okay. I actually think integrating them is a really good thing, because it takes a step over from where they are happy with their social media and don't really want to engage with our side. And I found as I've added bits, students become more confident at then looking in VLE in a more engaged way, and they sort of see it not being so different, because they're obviously happy on things like Facebook and Twitter and stuff, and they go through phases of what their latest thing they want to do is, like putting up Snapchat pictures and things like that. So I learn more about their social media as well by doing that, because I think they're moving away from things like Facebook a little bit. They're leaving that to us old things they keep telling me in the class.
That's nice.
but using social media channels is another just form of communication with them as well. So our students actually asked us to, as well as send traditional email to their student accounts, the really important pieces of notes, opportunities to actually put on, we have level Facebook pages specific for each level.
Yeah, I think that question came in slightly in response to something that I said, and I think my point, I agree with what you've just said. I think that integration can be a really good thing. I think my point was also that however much you do that, students will find a social space where we're not, and we shouldn't worry about that. That's fine. If they're getting misinformation from there, then that's a problem, but it's about making sure they know where they get the right information. But I think we will never enter into student social space and shouldn't expect to. And frankly, I don't always want to be there either. I don't want to know what they're saying about me behind my back. So I think we accept that, but the integration, intentional again, of those tools into actually learning activity and communicating with them about learning activity is a good thing.
Yeah, and we make sure that we have a formal process, regardless of how the course is delivered, where all course-related questions have to go through your learning management system in that course online, and any announcements also go there.
Yeah.
So the students will have these messages pushed out to them for the announcements, and the course questions forum is one that can be interactive. So what we find, as was mentioned earlier, is students start answering each other's questions, right? And then that's just the forum. So then if they're using social media for other modes of communication or collaborative work, that's absolutely fine.
Wanda's had to depart, but it's been great to have her with us. We do still have some time if there are any more questions, and thanks for adding that in, Christina. I think using social media as a gateway drug, but also controlling access to the official documents is probably not a bad not a bad mix. There was another question about pedagogy. How do we empower, I'm looking at the wrong bit, I think. How do we empower staff to see blended learning as a pedagogy that they can use? If that makes sense. I'm just reading what's on here.
Well, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to run as well. So before I do,
No problem.
They have to just see the value, and it's about where they are in the journey, right? So if they're champions that want to do it, well then that's great, you're there. If they're not, they have to see the value. So if it's going to, for us, it's been about, we've got the same contact hours, but we've refocused that it's about student learning hours rather than the traditional model of remission, if you like. And it's about how the instructor will also benefit. So they'll see the greater engagement, et cetera, et cetera. You have to sell it to them in the way that works for them. And I'm not sure there's a one-size-fits-all answer.
No.
And I'm sorry I have to run.
No, it's been great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting and very insightful to hear your experiences, yours and Wanda's working practices, and how you manage it there. And thanks for being involved, and I hope to see you online again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Cheerio.
All right, 2 down, 3 to go. Sheila, you're still here.
Okay, I was going to follow up that point. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I was going to follow up that point because I think we need to actually realise that a lot of academics might not actually be as comfortable in some of these online forums and with using these types of tools. So we need to build their confidence in being able to use them and actually give them enough time. Because I don't know about your institute, but I know that a lot of the institutes have so much of a heavy workload. There's a lot of background administration, and people don't feel like they have the time to implement using some of these tools. We've got a nice scheme going at the moment where we've got people that we can drop in and they'll show us how to use things like some of these new tools for polling in the class and free and doing things interactively in a different way. And when the staff have time to go and do them, then they're quite keen to have a go. But I think sometimes it's just finding space, giving them the space and saying this is a good pedagogic activity, to give them the power to be able to say yes, spend a bit of time, play and do it, not have people saying, well, why aren't you doing this and what else is going on? And I think so it's finding the right time, I think, in the academic year to be able to give them the space to feel confident at trying some of this new stuff.
Absolutely. It is a mind shift change when you look at those tools, and it does take a while for you to be able to reflect and then think how best to actually use those tools. And normally it's when you're grappling against an engagement problem, just at the back of your mind you think, oh, I know, there is this that we could use. But it does take time for you to reshape your mind to thinking of those wider options.
I think also one of the things I've learned since coming to Solent is if you're amongst some quite skillful people in this area, and I'm talking about, for example, our learning technologists, our support people, who when a member of staff comes in and presents a problem they're having, the solution can sometimes be, well, have you tried this? And suddenly they see a tool that they'd never used before as a potential solution to that problem, and then they get the support to set that tool up. And they'll come back after that and say, do you know what, this worked, now can I try something else? And I think, the project I was working on last year, I often said to Karina, it feels like I'm winning people around one conversation at a time. But actually, there's something to be said for that. That time, the conversation, the starting where someone's at and helping them to try something new without pushing them too far. I think all of those things there's the large scale stuff and the things that we have to do as part of our role. And then there's the smaller things that are about conversations and relationships and building those and helping people. And that's about, I think, the university being aware of the team that it's got and the staff being aware of that and coming in and making use of that expertise. And that's a kind of advocacy role that those of us that have benefited from it, I think, need to get out there and talk about more.
Yeah. There's another question here. I think it relates really to what Sheila was talking about earlier. but I think it's worth revisiting. Do you find that it is sometimes easier for students to build relationships with tutors online? I think you were talking about students building relationships with students online, but is this also a way to bring a tutor into the conversation as well? Do you think that is easier than in a classroom situation?
Yes, from our experience, we've found that students become more confident at being able to sort of vocalise what they want to. They don't sort of see it quite so threatening. So when they see you face to face, they might think, "Oh, I don't know if I should ask," and things there. So it takes down the barriers all ways around, I think, actually.
And I had a question myself, because I can do that. About collaboration. I was wondering, you've all collaborated with people in one way or another, but who drives the collaboration? Is that you driving it because you can see it's a good idea? Do you respond to somebody else's idea? How does that work for you?
I think initially you plan the collaboration in an artificial way because the students don't know each other. But I think after a while they actually drive the collaboration, and they start by involving them in the design and the development of that. They actually start mapping that themselves.
I would agree with you. I think for me, in the particular case study I used, I was astounded at how the students took over that unit, and effectively they did do that. They took over the unit and they began to dictate what they wanted covered in class and what they wanted to do online in a way that I'd never seen before. And I think it's a really important thing to say. That's quite scary, because there is that moment when you feel like you might be about to lose control of your own unit. But actually, it's that shift in thinking. What's my role as the teacher here? Well, my role is to facilitate their learning, not to dictate what they should be learning. And I think making that mind shift made that collaboration aspect feel safer for me. But definitely in the end, the students were driving it. And then from the point of view of designing, I'm naturally not the greatest technical person in the world, so I need the collaboration of others to. I can do the educational side, and I've got some basic, technical expertise. But in terms of collaborating with colleagues, I would drive that, but very quickly be happy to be collaborating with others and giving them a lead in appropriate situations. So yeah, I think in both cases it depends on the task, doesn't it? I think.
And how about for you, Sheila?
Yes, I found that students can actually redevelop things in a totally different way. For our organisational elements, it's all been. I started off with space for them, and it's them that's driven what they want there, how they want to be able to interact with it, what they want us to be able to see, what they want themselves to only be able to see, so they can sort of like define their space a little. And all we've done is make sure that they understand the rules about the things that they do online and how they do them. If it's a space we're not in, we make them very aware of how to interact with each other in an appropriate manner. So the very first year, we did have some issues with some students where one of them was sort of bullying a couple of the others online, and you sort of forget that somebody would do that. You think, well, you're a grown-up, why would you do that? But it was sort of a bit like child, like the playground type of thing there. So you had to sort of say, no, you can't do that. There is a level of respect that you must have for each other.
Do you have to lay ground rules at the beginning of a term or semester, or is it just an as and when situation, like something like that?
When we're giving them space online to do things there, and we're not in the same space, we give them the rules beforehand. So that helps on the whole. So it's very few incidents we get, but you need to be mindful. It's one of those things you just take for granted, and people know nobody's going to do something that silly, and then when they do, you think, oh, I should have done something to stop that.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. There was a question in the room, I thought. Katana, yes. It's all right, I'll repeat it.
I'm thinking about international students whose language English is not just their first time. Do you think the blended learning approach would provide a more opportunity to go back and forth in terms of the content that's presented?
So for international students, is blended learning a useful approach for them to be able to revise and review materials? That's a good question. What do you think?
I think it comes back to what I said at the start. Actually, blended learning pedagogies have fantastic tools at your fingertips, but actually that crosses across both boundaries. So there's no reason that even if you don't have a blended learning unit, that you shouldn't be using some of the practices that we've heard today. And as we all know, that definitely helps and assists international students and students with other support needs as well.
Yeah, and I think some of the things we talked about that if you're using something like Panopto to lecture capture, that ability to rewind and fast forward, and then the ability to access written materials outside of class if you've not followed things in class, and then as you say, some of the online tools that enable you to translate that kind of material, all of that kind of stuff. I think it can be helpful, but in the same way, we need to be aware of the particular challenges that it might raise for international students by asking them about those, and help them to overcome those challenges as well. But I think the potential is for it to be a really useful tool, yes.
And what's the situation at London Met, Sheila?
We find that we've got quite a few international students who do our distance learning modules, and they like the fact that they can do it at their own pace, and so they get to build up the confidence. But what we remind all of our students, whether they're face-to-face or not, because we teach biomedical sciences, I teach biomedical science in the whole there, that they're actually all learning a new language together as well, because the terminologies we use when they come into the university environment is a new learning language process as well. So that actually helps some of the other students think, oh, I'm not that bad then, because other people are learning these new words as well. So it helps everybody build their confidence, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice point, actually. It's just another form of discourse in a way, isn't it? So, you're learning your disciplinary language at the same time. Yeah, nice. Are there any further questions? I think I've exhausted. Oh, I've just got 10 notifications. I think I've exhausted Twitter. Now this is interesting. Can we afford to make progress one conversation at a time, or is this something that we need to really do much faster?
It's both and, isn't it? I think that's a great question. I think I'm going to be very careful how I answer this. I think we have to look at institution-wide buy-in. I think you need buy-in from the top. And I think that's a really, really important thing. If we're going to adopt blended learning as a strategy, as a way of working, then that needs to be an institution-wide thing. That said, I would always argue that if we lose those one-on-one conversations and those relationships that enable us to, I think also you have a conversation with one person, you can mistakenly think you've just had a conversation with one person and that's it. If that one person goes back to their department and talks about that conversation and shares that practice in their department, then suddenly that one conversation was much more economically viable than perhaps it might otherwise have seemed. So I would want to argue for both, and I would be really sad if we lost a situation in which we had time to sit down with one person and help them with their practice, both for them and for the benefit of a wider department as well. So at risk of being controversial, that's what I would say.
So be it.
I think one of the other things about it, when you start talking to people, is that actually lots of people are doing lots of these practices. Yeah. Lots of people are actually having research-informed teaching. Lots of people are flipping their classrooms, but they might just not have labelled them in that way. Really, and I think that's the other education piece to it as well.
And I think as well, unless you're having those networking conversations with the odd one person here and there, you don't find out what other people are doing. And then suddenly you can connect people together and they begin to have that conversation themselves, and suddenly you're not needed because that, but if we're not talking to one another over a cup of coffee from time to time, I think that
would be a
sad thing. Yeah.
Do you have any kind of institutional drive at London Met, Sheila, for more online learning or blended learning?
Yes, we've got several fora. We've got a university-wide teaching and learning conference group that and people present to everybody, and so you can go and drop in and listen to different things. But also at a school level, we do a lot of inter-sharing and things like that, and development. And the university at the moment is very keen at looking at sort of expanding their distance learning provision and trying to make a bigger mark on it, doing it sort of with a bit more rigour, and rather than it's all built up, our distance learning built up from people saying, oh, this is a good idea, and a small group of people working together making something happen, and then telling somebody else they've done it, and they're like, oh, I'd like to do that. So there's a mixture of sort of still having those little face-to-face bits and a bit of sharing. But we do have a teaching and learning group that meet up, and we try to look at different types of things that are going on, and how we can disseminate what might be useful to people, and pick up best practice from some of the areas and translate them into our areas.
Yeah, sounds like an approach that works from what we can see here. Right, we have time for one more question, and then this wonderful experiment is going to be at an end. So, Dee.
Kind of my question is, how do we get academics and other people to buy into blended learning? How do we share best practice? How do we do that networking? How do we spread the word that this is actually a really good thing to do?
I like that. So how do we get academic buy-in, and how do we spread best practice?
I think Karina should answer that, because that's her job.
All right, I'm not afraid. I am a big believer in carrot, not stick. I think what I will shortly be doing, as soon as we get all the technology in place, is I want a platform where I can share all the amazing things that people at Solent are doing, however big or small, and just really break it down, because so much of what people do that others get astonished by or think, oh my goodness, I couldn't do that, it would take too long. Actually, it's all really achievable. It just seems like it's a leap. So what I want to do is, and the important thing is a platform. I think you need to have a place where this conversation can happen. It could be online, it could be in person, but you need somewhere where you can say, this is amazing, this is why, and look at these tiny steps that will get you there. So hopefully we'll be in a position to start doing that, I'd like to say before Christmas, but I'm going to settle for
Christmas.
soon. Yeah, I didn't say which year, so awesome.
I think that's really important, because I think having a really practical example of something that somebody else has done, seeing it in practice, I think, you know, it helps you to, I think sometimes it demystifies it a bit. You think, actually, there's nothing as complicated as I thought there. I could do that. But I think, and sometimes it's hard to visualize until you've seen it work in practice. So we need to be getting that message out, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, lack of curiosity in your colleagues is frustrating. Frustrating. How do you overcome? Is that an issue for you, Sheila? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, we have members of staff that just don't want to do anything differently and don't want to change. But I think students can drive that. If they're getting a good experience in somebody else's class, or somebody else is doing something differently, they'll actually say, well, why don't we get this in this module? Why aren't you doing this with us? So then they sort of come along and say, well, what are you doing, and why are you doing it, and how do you do it? And so I think the ones that are more resistant gradually will be dragged along, because it's what the students are asking for.
Yeah, I like that. I think getting the students on side, vital.
I agree, but I still think that there are academics who will just say, sorry, not interested.
I think there will always be, and I think that's where the stick approach might come in.
I was going to say, I think one of the ways to start addressing that, which we've done, isn't it, is that there is that sort of baseline expectation of what should be on our VLE for students. And I think, you know, one of the things we worked quite hard on was helping lecturers to see that even if they were just meeting the baseline, they'd started the journey. And then it was about, okay, what could we do next? And I think that, you know, it's hard, and there will always be people that won't adopt. And I think that almost the critical mass beginning to is one of the ways that we work on that. And I do think there's something quite powerful about students asking those questions. I had a student on the teacher training course that I was talking about earlier who as a result of what we were doing, took Padlet, a sort of sharing collaborative tool, into her classroom. It was in a secondary school. And within a matter of days, the art teacher that was overseeing her as her mentor was saying, what have you done with these students? How can I do the same thing? And so I do think there is something quite powerful about that. But you know, there will always be some people that struggle to change things. And we kind of need to focus our energies on the people that are willing to run with it and continue to work with them.
I think that's Sheila.
Okay,
no, carry on.
I know we're over time.
That's all right.
We've also got a peer observation scheme that we do there. So within our school, when we want people to try and do things in a different way, we pair people up in little groups so they go and watch each other doing things different ways to try and show them it's quite simple to be doing it, and they can see how the students react. And that sort of moves a few of them on to saying, oh, well, actually, you know, it's not that hard and I could give that a go.
Yeah, it is a good idea. That is a good idea. Worth a try. I'm not in charge of that, so I don't mind saying that. I think that is a positive note to end on. Actually, I think this has been a really interesting discussion. I hope you all agree. I hope everybody has got something out of this. And I want to thank Claire, Sheila, Christina and Wanda, our fantastic panellists, for joining us today and sharing their experiences. And I want to thank everybody who's here and watching on the live stream and who has sent in questions. And thank you very much. And I don't know, I've got that kind of euphoria you get when you finish a race. Maybe we'll do it again. Now I'm leaving. Thank you very much.